The moment my son handed me a glass of water, I knew something was wrong. It wasn't the gesture itself. Trevor had brought me things before, though rarely without being asked. It was the way his pale green eyes locked onto mine as I lifted the glass to my lips. Too focused, too deliberate. There was no casual warmth in his expression, only a cold calculation, as if he was studying my reaction to something I couldn't yet see coming. And for the first time in my 59 years, I felt genuinely afraid of the boy I had once rocked to sleep through countless midnight storms. Hold up. I'm curious where you're listening from, and if this story spoke to you, make sure you're subscribed. Trust me, what I have planned for tomorrow is going to blow you away. The water tasted normal, crisp, cold, with the faint mineral tang of our old well system here in Millbrook Valley. But Trevor's stare never wavered. He watched me drink like a scientist observing a lab experiment, his jaw set in that particular way that reminded me so painfully of his father. When I finished half the glass and set it down on the kitchen counter, he finally looked away, but not before I caught something flickering across his features. Relief? Disappointment? I couldn't tell, and that uncertainty sent ice through my veins. "Thanks, sweetheart," I managed, keeping my voice steady despite the growing knot in my stomach. That hit the spot. Trevor smiled then, but it was all wrong. Rehearsed and hollow, like he'd practiced it in a mirror. "Of course, Mom. You've been working so hard in the garden today. Gotta stay hydrated." I had been working in the garden, that much was true. Spring in Vermont meant preparing the soil for tomatoes and herbs, and I'd spent the better part of the afternoon turning earth and planting seeds. My hands still carried the scent of mint and fresh dirt. But something about the way Trevor mentioned it made my skin crawl, like he'd been watching me, timing something. Let me back up and tell you how we got here, because what I discovered just 24 hours before that glass of water changed everything I thought I knew about my only child. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was finally tackling the disaster that was my home office. Papers everywhere, tax documents dating back 5 years, expired insurance policies, bank statements I'd been meaning to file. I'm a freelance graphic designer, and organization has never been my strong suit. My late husband, James, used to handle all the paperwork before he passed 3 years ago, and I'd been drowning in administrative chaos ever since. I was sorting through a stack of mail that had been sitting on my desk for weeks when I found it, a thick envelope from Evergreen Life Insurance Company addressed to Mrs. Dorothy Elizabeth Whitman. That's me. The envelope had been opened, which was strange because I didn't remember opening it. Inside was a policy summary that made my blood run cold. Policyholder Trevor James Whitman, insured Dorothy Elizabeth Whitman. Death benefit, $850,000. Premium, $127 monthly. Policy status, active. I read it 3 times, each pass making less sense than the last. My son had taken out a life insurance policy on me, a substantial one, without my knowledge, without my signature, without even telling me. My hands started trembling as I dug deeper into the paperwork. The application was there too, and what I saw made me sick. My son had forged my signature, a decent forgery, but I knew my own handwriting. He'd listed himself as my primary caregiver and claimed I was financially dependent on him, which was laughably false. I owned my house outright, had a healthy retirement account, and my design business was thriving. If anything, I'd been the one supporting him through his various career transitions over the past few years. But the most chilling detail was the medical questionnaire. According to the paperwork, I had a history of heart problems, diabetes, and chronic depression. All lies. I'm healthier than most women half my age. I hike, I garden, I barely even catch colds. Yet somehow, this insurance company had approved a policy based on fictional health conditions that would supposedly justify a large payout in the near future. I sat there in my cluttered office, surrounded by the detritus of my disorganized life, and felt the world tilt sideways. This wasn't just paperwork. This was evidence that my son was planning for my death, expecting it, maybe even hoping for it.
The worst part? I couldn't even remember the last time Trevor had shown genuine concern for my well-being. He lived 2 towns over in Clearwater Falls with his girlfriend Brielle, and their visits had become increasingly infrequent over the past year. When he did call, it was usually because he needed money for his photography equipment, for their upcoming wedding, for the down payment on a house they were supposedly buying. I'd given him thousands over the years, always believing his promises to pay me back, always making excuses for why the money never materialized. But now, everything took on a sinister new meaning. The recent increase in visits, his sudden interest in my daily routines, the way he'd started asking about my medications, my doctor's appointments, my emergency contacts. Questions I'd interpreted as a son finally maturing into genuine care for his aging mother.
How naive could I be? That evening, I called Trevor's number. It went straight to voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same thing. Finally, around 9 p.m., he texted back, "Sorry, Mom, crazy day. Everything okay?" Everything okay. As if he didn't know exactly what wasn't okay. I texted back, "Just wanted to chat. Are you free to visit this week?" His response came quickly. "Actually, Brielle and I were planning to drive up tomorrow afternoon. She's been wanting to see your spring garden." Of course they were. Of course, Brielle, who had never shown the slightest interest in gardening, suddenly wanted to see my flowers. Nothing about this was coincidental anymore. So here we are, back to that glass of water and Trevor's calculated stare. They'd arrived an hour earlier, all smiles and warm hugs, carrying a bag of expensive groceries and talking about cooking dinner for their favorite woman. Brielle had gushed over my early tulips, while Trevor wandered through the house like he was taking inventory. And now, as I watched my son pretend to tidy up the kitchen while stealing glances at me every few seconds, I realize I'm not just dealing with financial manipulation anymore. The way he's monitoring me, the timing of their visit, the strange taste that's starting to develop at the back of my throat, despite the water seeming normal, this has escalated into something far more dangerous. I am no longer just his mother. I am an $850,000 problem that needs solving. And that realization changes everything. We poured our hearts into researching and telling the story. If you're hooked, show some love with a subscribe. Now, where were we? The strange taste in my mouth grew stronger over the next hour. Not bitter exactly, but metallic, like I'd been sucking on pennies. I tried to dismiss it as paranoia, but when I caught Trevor checking his watch for the 3rd time in 10 minutes, I knew my instincts were right. Brielle was in the living room, flipping through one of my old photo albums and making appropriately nostalgic comments about Trevor's childhood pictures, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the kitchen, toward me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Anticipation? Nervousness? "Mom, you look tired," Trevor said suddenly, appearing beside me at the sink where I was rinsing dinner plates. "Maybe you should sit down." I wasn't tired. If anything, adrenaline was keeping me more alert than I'd been in months. But I nodded and moved to the kitchen table, keeping my voice casual. "You're probably right. It's been a long day." He smiled that same rehearsed smile. "Why don't you rest while Brielle and I clean up? We've got this covered." As they bustled around my kitchen with suspicious efficiency, I excused myself to use the bathroom. Instead, I slipped into my home office and pulled out the insurance paperwork again. This time, I read every single word, and what I found made my stomach drop. The policy had a clause I'd missed before: double indemnity for accidental death. That meant if I died in an accident, a fall, a drowning, anything that looked unintentional, the payout would jump to $1.7 million. But that wasn't the worst part. Stapled to the back of the application was a medical report I'd never seen before, supposedly from Dr. Richard Henley at Millbrook Family Practice. According to this report, I'd been experiencing dizzy spells, balance issues, and episodes of confusion for the past 6 months. It recommended that I avoid being alone, especially near stairs or water. The problem, I'd never been to Dr. Henley. My doctor was Dr. Sarah Kim at the clinic on Maple Street, and I hadn't seen her since my routine physical 8 months ago, where I'd received a clean bill of health. Someone had fabricated an entire medical history to justify my expected death. My phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. Package delivered as requested. Payment due on completion. Wrong number, obviously, but the timing made my skin crawl. I quickly photographed all the insurance documents with my phone and emailed them to myself, just as I heard Trevor calling from the kitchen. "Mom, you okay in there?" "Just fine, honey. Be right out." When I returned to the kitchen, I found them both standing by the back door, looking out at my garden in the fading light. "Your herb garden is really coming along, especially that patch by the old well." The old well. It had been covered with rotting wooden planks for decades, something James had always meant to fix properly but never got around to. Recently, the boards had become even more unstable. Just last week, I'd made a mental note to call someone to secure it properly. "Yes," I said carefully, "I really should get that well covered better. It's becoming quite the safety hazard." Trevor turned then, and for just a moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. "Oh, you don't need to worry about that, Mom. We could take a look at it later, maybe after dinner, when it's cooler." After dinner, when it would be dark, when a fall into an old well might look like a tragic accident.
The metallic taste in my mouth intensified, and suddenly I understood. The water hadn't just been water. Whatever they'd given me was supposed to make me dizzy, disoriented, easy to lead outside for a evening stroll around the garden, easy to stumble near that conveniently dangerous well. But they'd underestimated me. Years of hiking Vermont's mountains had given me a strong constitution, and whatever sedative they'd used wasn't working as quickly as they'd planned. I sat back down at the kitchen table, feigning a slight wobble. "You know what? I am feeling a bit lightheaded. Must be all the excitement of having you both here." Trevor's eyes sharpened with interest. "Maybe some fresh air would help? We could walk around the garden before it gets completely dark." "That sounds lovely," I said, making my voice slightly slurred. "Just give me a minute to find my sweater." Instead of going to my bedroom, I ducked into the downstairs bathroom and forced myself to vomit up as much of the water as I could. The metallic taste was overwhelming, confirming my suspicions. Then I splashed cold water on my face and tried to think. I had maybe an hour before they expected their plan to take full effect. An hour to figure out how to survive the night with two people who were planning to kill me for money. When I came back to the kitchen, they were whispering by the window. They stopped the moment they saw me. "Ready for that walk, Mom?" Trevor asked, his voice honey-sweet. "Actually," I said, swaying slightly for effect, "I think I might need to lie down first. That dizzy spell is getting worse." I saw Trevor and Brielle exchange a look. They were recalculating, adapting their timeline. "Of course," Brielle said quickly. "Why don't you rest on the couch? We'll keep an eye on you." As I settled onto the sofa, I caught Trevor pulling out his phone. He stepped into the hallway, but I could hear fragments of his whispered conversation. Taking longer than expected. Maybe increase the need to move tonight? My son wasn't just planning to kill me. He was coordinating with someone else. Someone who had provided whatever drug they'd used. Someone who was expecting confirmation that their package had been successfully delivered. I closed my eyes and listened to them moving around my house, these two people I'd welcomed with hugs and home-cooked meals, as they discussed the logistics of my murder in hushed tones. But here's what Trevor had forgotten about his mother. I didn't build a successful freelance business by being passive. I didn't survive 3 years of widowhood by giving up when things got difficult. And I certainly wasn't going to let a spoiled child and his accomplice cash in on my death without a fight. The drowsiness was real, but not overwhelming. I had time to think, to plan, and most importantly, I had something they didn't know about. A complete security system that James had installed the year before he died, including cameras that uploaded directly to cloud storage. Everything they'd said and done in my house today was being recorded. As I lay there on my couch, pretending to succumb to their poison, I started planning not just my survival, but their downfall. Because if Trevor wanted to play deadly games with his mother's life, he was about to learn that I didn't raise a quitter. And I sure as hell didn't raise someone smarter than me. The next 3 hours became the longest game of pretend I ever played. I lay on the couch, breathing deeply and occasionally letting out small whimpers, while Trevor and Brielle moved around my house like they owned it. Every few minutes, one of them would check on me, testing my responsiveness, watching for signs that their drug was taking full effect. "How are you feeling, Mom?" Trevor would ask, his voice dripping with fake concern. Dizzy," I'd mumble, keeping my eyes half closed. "Everything's spinning a little." What they didn't know was that I'd spent the first hour forcing myself to stay alert by reciting design principles in my head. Color theory, typography rules, anything to keep my mind sharp. The sedative was working, but not nearly as fast as they'd hoped. My years of prescription sleep aids after James's death had apparently built up some tolerance. Around 9 p.m., when full darkness had settled over Millbrook Valley, I heard Trevor make another phone call from the kitchen. This time I could hear every word. "She's responding, but slower than you said. No, she's not unconscious yet. What do you mean increase it? We already gave her the full dose." "Fine, but if this goes wrong, you're taking the blame." My blood went cold. They were planning to give me more of whatever they'd already poisoned me with. I had to act soon, but I also needed more evidence. If I was going to survive this night, I needed proof that would destroy them completely. When Trevor returned to check on me, I groaned softly and mumbled, "Bathroom. Need the bathroom." "I'll help you," Brielle offered immediately, jumping up from the armchair where she'd been pretending to read one of my magazines. No, I slurred. "Just need a minute. Alone."
They exchanged that look again, the one I was beginning to hate, but they let me stumble to the bathroom unassisted. The moment I locked the door, I pulled out my phone and opened the security app. James had been paranoid about break-ins after a rash of burglaries in our area, so he'd installed cameras in every room except the bedrooms and bathrooms. What I saw on the live feed made my hands shake. While I'd been in the bathroom earlier, they'd searched my house. Thoroughly. Trevor was going through my desk drawers in the office, while Brielle had been in my bedroom, examining my jewelry box and checking behind picture frames. They were already treating my home like a crime scene they needed to clean up. But the most damning footage was time-stamped from an hour ago. I watched Trevor carefully measuring a white powder into a fresh glass of water, the glass he was planning to offer me when I came out of the bathroom, the second dose his contact had recommended. I quickly forwarded the most incriminating clips to 3 different email addresses: my lawyer, my neighbor Ruth, and my cousin Patricia in California. I typed a quick message: "If something happens to me, this is why. Insurance policy details in my office safe. Combination is James's birthday." Then I did something that probably saved my life. I called 911, but instead of reporting an emergency, I used a trick James had taught me from his volunteer firefighter days. I reported a wellness check request on myself for the following morning. "I'm feeling unwell and live alone," I told the dispatcher quietly. "If no one hears from me by 8 a.m. tomorrow, could you send someone to check? I'm Dorothy Whitman on Cedar Lane." It wasn't enough to save me tonight, but it meant that by morning, someone would come looking. If Trevor and Brielle's plan succeeded, they'd have to explain why I'd called in my own wellness check hours before my accidental death. When I emerged from the bathroom, moving even more slowly than before, Trevor was waiting with that fresh glass of water. "You look dehydrated, Mom. This might help." I accepted the glass with trembling hands, raised it to my lips, and pretended to take a sip. When neither of them was looking directly at me, I let most of the water dribble down my chin onto my sweater, making it look like I was too disoriented to drink properly. "Maybe we should get her some fresh air now," Brielle suggested, her voice tight with impatience. "The garden walk might help clear her head." Trevor nodded eagerly. "Good idea. Mom, do you think you can walk? We'll support you." This was it, the moment they'd been building toward all evening. I let them help me to my feet, swaying dramatically and gripping Trevor's arm like my life depended on it, which, ironically, it did. As we moved toward the back door, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the hallway mirror. My face was pale, my hair disheveled, my sweater damp with spilled water. I looked like exactly what they wanted me to look like, a confused, drugged old woman about to have a tragic accident. But my eyes were still sharp, still aware, and still planning. "The air feels good," I mumbled as we stepped onto the back porch. So fresh. The garden was beautiful in the moonlight, my spring flowers casting strange shadows across the winding stone path James had laid 20 years ago. Under different circumstances, it would have been peaceful. Tonight, it felt like walking through a graveyard. They guided me slowly along the path, Trevor on my left, Brielle on my right. We were moving toward the far corner of the property where the old well waited under its rotting wooden cover. I could see it ahead, a dark circle of danger that they planned to be my final destination. "Careful, Mom," Trevor said as we approached a slight slope in the path. "It's a little uneven here." I stumbled deliberately, catching myself on his arm. Sorry, everything's so blurry." "That's okay," Brielle cooed. "We're almost to the best part. Remember how you used to tell us about your herb garden back here, near the old well?" So they had been planning this for longer than I thought. They knew about the well, knew it was dangerous, knew I'd mentioned it before. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was a carefully researched murder plot. We were 20 feet from the well when I made my move. "Wait," I said, stopping suddenly and swaying on my feet. I think I'm going to be sick." I doubled over, making retching sounds, and stumbled sideways off the path into my herb garden. Trevor lunged forward to catch me, but I was already moving, grabbing a handful of loose soil and rocks. "Mom!" he called out, genuine panic creeping into his voice. Not panic for my well-being, but panic that their plan was falling apart. I straightened up, still swaying, but now facing them both in the moonlight. For the first time all evening, I let my real voice come through. Clear, strong, and absolutely furious.
Did you really think I was that stupid? The transformation on their faces was immediate. The fake concern melted away, replaced by shock, then calculation, then something that looked almost like respect. "I don't know what you're talking about," Trevor said, but his voice had lost its honeyed tone. I held up my phone, the security app still open. "I know about the insurance policy. I know about the fake medical reports. I know about your friend who provided the drugs, and I know exactly what you plan to do to me at that well." Brielle took a step backward, her eyes darted toward the house, looking for an escape route. "But here's what you don't know," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "Everything you've done tonight has been recorded. Everything you've said has been heard. And if I don't check in with the police tomorrow morning, they'll know exactly where to look for answers." Trevor's mask finally slipped completely. The charming sun disappeared, replaced by someone I barely recognized, someone cold and desperate, and very, very dangerous. "You always were too smart for your own good," he said quietly. That's when I realized our deadly game was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. The silence that followed my revelation stretched between us like a taut wire. Trevor and Brielle stood frozen in the moonlight, their carefully crafted plan crumbling around them. But I could see the gears turning in my son's head. He was calculating, searching for a way to salvage this disaster. "You're confused, Mom," he said finally, his voice taking on that patronizing tone I'd heard him use with retail workers and waitstaff. "Really?"
I pulled up the security footage on my phone and turned the screen toward them. Then explain this. The video showed Trevor clearly measuring white powder into the water glass, pausing to check his phone for what I now realized were dosage instructions. Even in the grainy night vision, his movements were deliberate and calculating. Brielle's face went white. "Trevor, she has everything. We need to leave. Now." But Trevor was staring at me with something I'd never seen before. Pure hatred. "You know what your problem is, Mom? You never knew when to mind your own business." He lunged forward, reaching for my phone. But I'd spent 3 years learning to live alone, installing motion sensor lights, securing my property. I knew every stone on this path, every route that might trip an unwary foot. As Trevor charged toward me, I stepped sideways and watched him stumble into the raised herb bed I'd built last spring. "The police will be here in the morning," I said, backing toward the house. "Your best option is to run, now." "No." Trevor pulled himself out of the rosemary bushes, dirt streaking his designer jeans. "No, we've come too far. We need that money and you're going to give it to us." That's when Brielle surprised me. Instead of supporting Trevor's increasingly desperate plan, she grabbed his arm. "Stop it! Just stop! This is insane! She's recorded everything! We're already finished!" "Shut up," Trevor snarled, shaking her off. "You wanted the money as much as I did. You picked out the house. You chose the wedding venue. You're not backing out now." The wedding venue. My heart sank as I realized how deep their deception went. "There is no wedding, is there?" Brielle's silence was answer enough. 3 years, I said, the pieces falling into place. "You've been lying to me for 3 years. The Christmas dinners, birthday celebrations, heart-to-heart conversations about their future, all performance art designed to manipulate me." But it also revealed something important. Trevor was desperate enough to destroy his entire facade. That meant he was running out of options, and desperate people make mistakes. "How much do you owe them?" I asked quietly. Trevor's composure cracked slightly. "What?" "The people who provided the drugs, the ones coordinating this plan. How much do you owe them?" Brielle answered before Trevor could stop her. 40,000, but it'll be 60 by next week if we don't pay." Gambling debts. Suddenly everything made sense. The urgency, the outside coordination, the willingness to commit murder. Trevor hadn't just wanted my money, he needed it to save his own life. "So, let me understand this. You hired a fake girlfriend, forged insurance documents, and planned to murder your own mother because you can't pay your bookies?" "It's not that simple," Trevor snapped. "You don't understand what these people are capable of." "I'm beginning to," I replied. That's when I heard the crunch of gravel in my driveway. Car doors slamming, voices calling out. Trevor and Brielle froze, panic flashing across their faces. "Dorothy, you out there? It's Ruth from next door."
My neighbor's voice was the most beautiful sound I'd heard all night. Ruth Henderson was 73, built like a linebacker, and carried a .357 Magnum in her purse everywhere she went. "We got your message," called another voice, my cousin Patricia. "We drove straight from Burlington when we saw the video." I'd forgotten that Patricia lived only 2 hours away. She must have received my email and called Ruth immediately. "Back here," I shouted, relief flooding through me. "In the garden." Trevor's last vestige of control shattered. "This isn't over," he hissed, backing toward the tree line that bordered my property. But I wasn't finished with him yet. "Actually, it is," I said, pulling a second phone from my sweater pocket, James's old phone that I'd never had the heart to disconnect. "I've been live streaming our entire conversation to Facebook. All 300 of my friends have been watching you confess to attempted murder." The look on Trevor's face was worth every terrifying moment of the last 4 hours. Pure, absolute disbelief. "You're bluffing." I turned the phone toward him, showing the live stream with its growing list of shocked comments and viewers. James taught me about social media in his last year, said it was important to stay connected. He also taught me that the best way to catch a liar is to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness as Ruth and Patricia emerged from behind the house, moving with purpose. Ruth indeed had her purse clutched firmly in one hand. "Dorothy, honey, are you all right?" Patricia called out. "I am now," I replied, never taking my eyes off Trevor. Brielle was already running, disappearing into the woods without a backward glance. Smart girl, she'd realized that staying meant facing charges as an accomplice to attempted murder. Trevor stood his ground for another moment, weighing his options. Then his shoulders sagged in defeat. "The insurance policy is void anyway," he said bitterly. "They require a 2-year waiting period for beneficiary payouts. I would have had to wait another 8 months even if you died tonight." The final insult. He'd planned to murder me for money he couldn't even have collected. Ruth stepped into the circle of light from my motion sensors, and I saw she'd indeed brought her gun. "Should I call the police, Dorothy, or do you want to handle this family business privately?" I looked at my son, this stranger who'd shared my home, eaten at my table, and plotted my death for $850,000 he couldn't even access. The boy I'd raised was gone, if he'd ever existed at all. "Call them," I said. "This stopped being family business the moment he poisoned my water." As Ruth dialed 911, Trevor made one last desperate play. "Mom, please, you don't understand the kind of people I owe money to. If I go to prison, they'll kill me anyway." For just a moment, I felt a flicker of the old maternal instinct, the desire to protect my child, no matter what he'd done. But then I remembered the insurance documents, the fake medical reports, the cold calculation in his eyes as he'd watched me drink poison. "You should have thought of that before you decided I was worth more dead than alive," I replied. The police sirens were already echoing across Millbrook Valley, growing louder with each passing second. Trevor looked toward the woods where Brielle had vanished, then back at me, then at Ruth's very steady gun hand. "I used to love you," he said quietly. "No, you used to need me. There's a difference." That distinction, I realized, was going to make all the difference in how I rebuilt my life after tonight. The police took Trevor away in handcuffs at 11:47 p.m. I watched from my kitchen window as the patrol car's red and blue lights disappeared down Cedar Lane, carrying my son toward a future I could no longer protect him from. Detective Maria Santos, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, stayed behind to take my statement and collect the evidence. "Mrs. Whitman, I have to say, your preparation probably saved your life tonight." She reviewed the security footage on her laptop. "The live stream alone is enough to convict him on attempted murder charges." I nodded, still processing the surreal turn my quiet evening had taken. "Will you find the other woman, Brielle?" "We'll try, but she's likely already out of state. People in her line of work, professional romance scammers, usually have exit strategies prepared." Detective Santos closed her laptop and looked at me seriously. "The bigger concern is the people your son owes money to. They might not be happy that their collection method failed." The thought hadn't occurred to me, but it should have. If Trevor owed dangerous people $60,000, his arrest wouldn't make that debt disappear. "What do you recommend?" "Stay vigilant, change your locks, maybe consider a security upgrade." She handed me her card. "Call me if anything seems off. These gambling syndicates don't usually target family members, but they're not known for their restraint either."
After the police left, Ruth and Patricia helped me clean up the house. We found evidence of Trevor and Brielle's search everywhere. Drawers slightly askew, picture frames moved, even my jewelry box had been rifled through. They'd been cataloging my assets, probably for weeks. "You can stay with me tonight," Ruth offered as we finished straightening the living room. I considered it, but something in me rebelled against being driven from my own home. "Thank you, but no. If I leave now, I'll never feel safe here again." Patricia frowned. "Dorothy, after what happened? After what happened, I proved I can take care of myself. I interrupted gently. Better than I ever thought possible. They left reluctantly around 2 a.m., but not before Ruth showed me how to engage the extra security features James had installed that I'd never bothered to learn. Motion sensors, window alarms, even a panic button that would alert the police automatically. I spent the rest of the night in my living room, wrapped in James's old flannel robe, processing everything that had happened. The betrayal hurt. God, it hurt more than I wanted to admit. But underneath the pain was something unexpected. Relief. For 3 years, I'd been living with a nagging sense that something was wrong with Trevor. His visits always left me feeling drained rather than loved. His requests for money had become increasingly elaborate and urgent. His girlfriend seemed too perfect, too interested in all the right things. I'd dismissed these feelings as paranoia, as the loneliness of widowhood making me suspicious of genuine affection. Turns out, my instincts had been right all along. The next morning brought reporters. Apparently, my Facebook live stream had been shared thousands of times overnight, and the story of the Vermont grandmother who outwitted her murderous son was making headlines. I gave one brief statement to the local news, emphasizing that domestic betrayal can happen to anyone and that trusting your instincts can save your life. Then I turned off my phone and went to work in my garden. The herbs I'd planted in spring were flourishing. Basil and oregano, thyme and rosemary. The patch where Trevor had stumbled showed boot prints in the soft soil, but the plants themselves were unharmed, resilient, like everything else that had survived the winter. Detective Santos called 3 days later with updates. Trevor had pled guilty to attempted murder and insurance fraud in exchange for a reduced sentence, 15 to 20 years instead of life. Brielle Martinez, her real name, apparently, was arrested in Montreal trying to cross into the United States with a fake passport. She'd been running romance scams across New England for 5 years. The gambling syndicate was actually relieved by Trevor's arrest. Apparently, he'd been telling them for months that his inheritance was coming soon, and they'd grown suspicious of his stories. They wrote off the debt rather than risk police attention. Sometimes, Detective Santos said, the criminals solve their own problems. 3 weeks after that terrible night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a month earlier. I listed my house for sale. Not because I was afraid, though I'd be lying if I said the old well didn't give me chills now. Not because of the memories, though my kitchen would never feel quite the same. I was selling because I'd realized something fundamental about my life. I'd been living for other people for so long that I'd forgotten what I actually wanted. For 28 years, I'd lived in this house because James loved it. For 3 years after his death, I stayed because it felt like honoring his memory. For the past year, I'd maintained it like a museum because Trevor might inherit it someday. But Trevor wasn't going to inherit anything from me now. And James, well, James had always told me that houses were just buildings. Home was wherever we chose to make it. I bought a small condo in Burlington, close to Patricia and her family. It has a tiny balcony where I can grow herbs in pots, and windows that look out over Lake Champlain instead of into dark woods where predators might hide. The neighbors are strangers, which means they have no expectations of who I should be or how I should live. For the first time in decades, I get to decide. My graphic design business has exploded since the news coverage. Apparently, there's something appealing about hiring the grandmother who live-streamed her son's murder confession on Facebook. I've had to turn down projects, something that would have terrified me 6 months ago when I worried constantly about financial security. I've also started dating. His name is Robert Chen.
a retired history professor who volunteers at the same animal shelter where I've begun fostering senior dogs. He's kind without being overwhelming, interesting without being dramatic, and has absolutely no knowledge of my financial situation because we split every bill down the middle.
When I told him about Trevor, about what happened that night, he listened without trying to fix anything or offering empty reassurances. Then he said, "Some people spend their whole lives waiting for permission to live for themselves. You just took yours." Last month, I received a letter from Trevor in prison. He wanted to apologize, to explain, to ask for forgiveness and maybe commissary money. I read it once, then threw it away without responding. Some bridges, once burned, should stay burned. I've learned that love without respect is manipulation, that family ties without trust are just shared DNA, that protecting yourself from people who would harm you isn't cruelty, it's wisdom. But most importantly, I've learned that it's never too late to choose yourself. People ask me if I'm angry at Trevor, if I hate him for what he tried to do. The answer is more complicated than they expect. I'm heartbroken for the child he could have been, the man he might have become if different choices had been made along the way. But I'm not angry anymore, because anger requires emotional investment, and I've decided to invest my emotions elsewhere. In myself, in my new life, in the future I'm building, one careful, deliberate choice at a time. Trevor taught me an important lesson that night, though not the one he intended. He showed me that the only person responsible for my happiness, my safety, and my well-being is me. And that knowledge, terrifying as it was to accept, has set me free.